freshman girls. Beneath that, we have this stupid idea from Zabirds and Zabats. My college had a database of students' info that anyone could access, ostensibly for email addresses, but it also included full names, home addresses, and classes. And no one in administration thought that this was a bad idea, somehow. Students called it Stalker Notes because its real name was something or another Notes, but I literally forgot its actual name. Tell me your database of students was designed by a guy without telling me your database of students was designed by a guy. Our next reply is from @WorkCat. At the end of a weird and terrible date, he asked me for a hug as I was turning to leave. I thought, whatever, let's get this over with. As I was pulling away, he forcibly grabbed the back of my head and shoved his tongue in my mouth before I was able to break free. The next morning, I had a 3-page email in my inbox telling me all the things that were wrong with me and why he's not interested in a second date. Man, I would love to see that email. Reason number 1, when I forcibly shoved my tongue down your throat, you acted disgusted for some reason, and I want a girl who's actually excited when I violate her mouth. Our next reply is from Justice Scrolling. I met him when I worked as a cashier in a small downtown shop. He wasn't my type, and he seemed a little off, but I was young and I had zero real dating experience. I agreed to grab coffee with him as a friend, and I made it clear that I didn't have any romantic interest. He became convinced that he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. He started stalking me and endlessly sending letters and gifts to me at work describing how we were fated to be together. When I confronted him to stop, he started having his friends follow me at work or drop by to check in on me. He prowled outside on nights that I had to close shop alone. I ended up quitting that job and things fizzled. 7 months later, I got a call from a number that I didn't recognize. It was the same dude. He had just got released from a short prison sentence and was letting me know that he thought of me every day. And he was going to find me so we could finally be together. I made up a story that I was traveling abroad for college and I would be gone indefinitely. I changed my number and luckily I haven't heard from him again. Hold up, in The Great Gatsby, doesn't Daisy end up marrying some other dude? Our next reply is from Perry LePew. He stabbed my end table with a knife after getting upset with me. Then he started stalking me. I moved and invested in cameras for my house and a dash cam. I had to endure 1 million emails and police reports. Oh, and his twin brother, forced himself on women and stalked girls a few years prior. He ended up killing 2 cops. Seems like creep runs in the family. Our next reply is from Karmatika. I'll give the rare success story. He was sort of creepy and weird and neckbeardy. We hung out and sort of flirted because I didn't want to be seen as shallow and didn't know how to hold boundaries, but I wasn't really interested. I eventually just sort of stopped giving him attention and giving off signals. Apparently, he made a couple of snide comments to people that we both knew about how, I don't date monogamous people anyway, which is a dick thing to say. A few years later, I saw him at a convention and he waved me down, and I was nervous, but he was like, hey, I wanted to apologize. I was a real prick to you and your friends. I've done a lot of work on myself, and I realized that women not liking me isn't a them problem, it's a me problem. I forgave him, and we hung out a couple of times since then. He's a good guy. He was just going through a cringy phase. Our next reply is from Kilgore Trout. I walked in on him peeing in my washing machine after letting him into my home for some reason. Our next reply is from Black Box Merlot. The guy was handsome, but way too into me for knowing nothing about me. It wasn't like when we spoke I was an open book or I felt a strong connection that would lead me to want to share info with him. This was not a I feel like I've known this man forever connection. I just thought this was normal dating, but I had a gut feeling that something was off. He talked to me like I'd been his girlfriend for months, but actually we went on 3 dates and we never even passionately hugged. After our 3rd date, I'd made my decision based on our short time getting to know one another, and I let him know that I had no interest in continuing to date him and that I didn't see us being compatible long term. He then locked me in his car and proceeded to ask if I wanted to move to California with him. WTF? and he started crying/begging with me to work this out. I tried to be very nice to him, but it got to the point where I was scared, and I wasn't sure how this was going to go since he was virtually a stranger. So I hit the dashboard of his car and said that if he didn't let me out of the car immediately, I was calling the cops. Then he threatened to unalive himself if I didn't spend the night with him at his house. I had never even been to this guy's house. He finally let me out of his car after like an hour or two, but he stayed in the parking lot of my apartment almost the entire night and called me nonstop. About a month later, he texted me out of the blue a really long paragraph apologizing profusely and saying that if I ever changed my mind to call him. I just said thanks for the apology and wished him well. I hope he's doing okay, but I wanted no part of that. Beneath that, we have this reply from Boozy Susie. Wow, I had something similar happen when I was about 18. I was modeling at the time, and I volunteered for a date auction for a charity. And some guy who was like 10 years older and I sorta knew bought me. We went on a date a few weeks later. It was dinner and like mini golf or something, and the date was kinda awkward but fine. Afterwards I said, okay, that was nice, time to take me home. Instead, he drove me to his house and insisted I join him for a nightcap. I refused, and he locked the car doors and wouldn't let me out. This was in the days of pre-cell phones, so I couldn't even call 911. Eventually, after an hour of him telling me how I owe him some more company because he paid so much for me, I got nearly hysterical and told him that if he didn't take me home this instant, I would kick his window out and scream for someone to call the cops. He did take me home, but was all surly about it, and I could not get out of the car fast enough. Like you, though, I didn't tell anyone. It was so messed up. I'm certain that he was planning to use a roofie on me.
This episode is brought to you by Samsung. With Galaxy Watch 5 and Watch 5 Pro, Samsung's here to help you hit your wellness goals. Watch 5 features advanced health monitoring and a powerful battery, while Watch 5 Pro goes next level with new GPS features and up to 80 hours of usage. Your goals, your choice. Visit Samsung.com to learn more about Galaxy Watch 5 and Watch 5 Pro. Features compatible with a smartphone with an Android 8.0 or later and RAM 1.5 gigabytes or more. Requires Samsung Health App 6.22 or later.
This episode is brought to you by Boar's Head. School is back in session, and Boar's Head is here to help you pack the perfect lunchbox with uncompromising quality and all-time family favorites like Everroast oven-roasted chicken breast, maple glazed honeycoat ham, and American cheese. Boar's Head makes packing lunch easy and delicious. Boar's Head. Compromise elsewhere. Shop Boar's Head at your local deli counter and find recipes and more at boarshead.com/back-to-school.
Our next reply is from Crazy Snack Girl. The dude in the flat across from mine started off as a really nice guy. He introduced himself, offered me food when he cooked too much, just a great guy all around. Within a few weeks, it became very clear that he was an alcoholic. I have a brother in recovery, so I really sympathized with him. I went out of my way to sit with him and eventually called him an ambulance when he had withdrawals. I live in the UK, so calling an ambulance is free. This carried on for a little while, with me sitting with him 2 or 3 times a week, waiting for an ambulance. One night, when he was having withdrawals, he kept grabbing my breasts. I was already on the phone to the ambulance service, but the woman heard me telling him to stop and sent the cops as well. He was carted off, and just like usual, I grabbed his keys and told him to knock on my door the next morning to get his keys. Well, the next time I looked after him, the groping got worse, and then slowly my life did as well. Suddenly, I had fires set outside of my windows and mutilated rat corpses left on my doorstep. I called the cops after every incident, and I got to know one cop who was put on my case really well. He suggested I put up cameras, so I did. There was footage of my neighbor standing outside in my yard at 3 a.m., just staring into my window multiple nights in a row. Terrifying, but not illegal. Well, 2 weeks after that, my neighbor snapped. There were builders in the garden next to ours, and they apparently woke him up at 4 p.m. He ran out with a kitchen knife and stabbed 2 of the builders and the neighbor's dog. Thankfully, everyone survived. He also slashed a bunch of tires on our street. When the cops came to search the dude's apartment, my policeman friend told me off the record that the neighbor had been faking being an alcoholic the entire time. He'd get into the ambulance, ride to the hospital, and then check himself out and walk home. Also, they found half a dozen decomposing rats in his bathtub that had been mutilated. They later found a bloody hammer under his bed. You'd think that him being arrested would be the end of it, but no! He put my name, picture, address, and telephone number on a prostitution website. I had men aggressively hounding me multiple times an hour for 2 entire weeks before I just cut all ties and fled the city. Last I heard, he was in jail, but that was a few years ago now. Yeah, I am never gonna make the same mistake again. Yo, is this the worst one so far? I think this is the worst one so far. I thought the guy who was peeing in the washing machine was gonna like top them all, but no. This guy gets the gold medal of creepy. Our next reply is from Starry Sky. On our first date, I ordered a beer. It came to the table super frothy. I was distracted for a moment, but when I looked at the beer again, there were very clear drip marks in the foam, like something had been dropped in it. I made up some excuse about not feeling well, and I got out of there. But, oops, I can't leave. My stupid self drove, and my car was valeted. I very uncomfortably got the car from the valet, and we both got in. He asked me to stop at a gas station so he could buy smokes on the way. Thank God, because I knew that going to his house was not a good idea. As soon as he got out of my car at the station, I peeled out and left him there. I never should have let him in my car, but I panicked. I didn't know what he was capable of. That was 15 years ago, and I'm now happily married to the best thing that ever happened to me. Our next reply is from Katie Wood. Back in high school, several of my girlfriends and I had an off period before lunch, so we were all sitting around a table chatting. One of the female security guards came up to us and told me that there was a new exchange student from Amsterdam who thought I was cute, but he was too nervous to come over and introduce himself. I had zero interest in men, but I figured there wasn't any harm in letting the guy come sit with us and helping him feel more comfortable at our school. So he comes over, sits down, and chats a bit. He seemed rather shy, and he had about a dozen piercings going up each of his arms that he kept fiddling with. Then class lets out, and people, including a bunch of my male friends, start showing up for lunch. My first male friend sits down and introduces himself. The new guy doesn't respond at all, doesn't even look at my friend. Weird. Maybe he's just shy? My second male friend comes and sits down. The same thing happens, which is slightly unsettling now. We kept trying to include him over lunch, but he would only respond to the women. He wouldn't even acknowledge the other guys at the table. I never talked to him again after that lunch period, and 2 weeks later he got expelled for slamming a girl against a locker and choking her to the point that she nearly passed out. Our next reply is from Conceited Polar Bear. I went on a first date for just drinks with a guy, and the red flags were immediate. He didn't look anything like his profile picture, and he got handsy almost as soon as we sat down. I wasn't into him at all, but we had a shared interest in horror novels, so I decided to extend the date into dinner. During the dinner, he drank several old fashions while I nursed a single beer. He then told me that he thought that we were soulmates, and he thought that we were going to fall in love. He also told me that his ex-girlfriend was going to get an abortion the next day. At the end of the date, his portion of the bill was significantly more than my portion because of all of his drinks, but he asked me to pay half, which I did. On top of that, he gave me flack for driving to the date even though it was only a mile from my house. But even after giving me flack for driving, he asked me to give him a lift home, which I did. Once we were in front of his place, he refused to get out of my car unless I went inside with him for a nightcap. I said absolutely not. He begged me to just enjoy a drink with him on his front porch. I said no, and I told him to get out of my car. He finally did. The next day, he texted me telling me that was the best date he'd ever had, and he couldn't wait to see me again. I told him no thank you, and I walked away with one lesson learned. I just need to say no from the beginning. Our next reply is from Large Locksmith. Long story short, he locked me in his damp, musty basement. There was a cell phone with no service down there. When his buddy Mario was upstairs, it auto-connected to his hotspot. I was able to orchestrate an escape plan. I was down there for 3 weeks. I went straight to the police station once I was out. All right, never mind. We have a new winner for Biggest Creep. That was r/AskReddit, and if you like this content, be sure to follow my podcast because I put out new Reddit podcast episodes every single day. Welcome to r/Am I the Butthole, where OP's husband would rather sleep with his boyfriends than with her. This podcast is supported by Anchor FM. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, then check out Anchor FM. Anchor FM is a free podcast platform that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. I really can't recommend these guys enough. This is the podcast platform that I personally use. Once you set up your podcast, Anchor FM will automatically distribute it to all other platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and others. It's super easy, super streamlined, and you can start making money immediately. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Am I the butthole for going home after I got told to sleep on the floor? I'll preface this by saying that my husband, who's 33, has a friend, Carl, who's also 33, who my husband considers to be one of his closest friends. My husband sometimes calls Carl his nicotine because of how much he misses him and wants to spend time with him. They do everything together. They're even co-workers working the same job. Unfortunately, Carl's wife passed away from cancer 3 months ago, which has caused him to distance himself. My husband felt devastated for him, and he recently started spending more time with him and brought him meals and new clothes. My husband and I planned a 3-day vacation to another state. Unbeknownst to me, my husband had invited Carl to come with us. This made me upset because it spoiled the entire vacation, and I only found out when he went to go pick him up. I sucked it up after my husband explained that Carl is a recent widower who's been wallowing in grief for so long and he needed this vacation. The problem is, money is tight, and since Carl hasn't worked ever since his wife passed away, he couldn't pay for his own room, and we didn't have budget for a second room. My husband said that we should just share one room, and again, I sucked it up since he said that we would be out all day on the beach anyway. On the first night, I was in bed when my husband and Carl got back. I got woken up by my husband telling me to get out of the bed and sleep on the mattress that he put on the floor for me, and he and Carl would take the bed. I asked him if he was serious, and he asked what else he was supposed to do. He said Carl was a guest, and we can't let him sleep on the floor, and at the same time, I can't share a bed with Carl while my husband sleeps on the floor. I told my husband that I didn't sign up for this, but he told me to suck it up and tried to pull the "Carl is a widower" card. I told Carl to get out. Then I got up, got dressed, and went home. My husband started yelling, calling me irrational, but I wasn't having it. I left the hotel and went back home. Carl didn't say anything when he saw me leave, except that I was making this non-issue an issue. They got back, and my husband refused to even talk to me, but still said that I ruined this trip for Carl and us, and I acted abhorrently and disgustingly. I admit that Carl is struggling, and I might have ruined this for him, but I didn't even know that he was coming. Okay, I can understand your husband being sympathetic to his friend's plight, but there's a big difference between empathy and what I just read here. OP, are you 100% positive that your husband's bromance hasn't evolved into a romance? Look, I'm not trying to say that two guys can't be close friends, but I've had the same group of guy friends for 20 years. We talk almost every single night together on Discord, and I'm not about to kick my wife out of the bed so I can cuddle up with my boys instead of my wife. You know, it's a little fishy, a little suspicious here. And either way, even if there isn't a romance between your husband and Carl, what he's doing to you is really disrespectful. OP, you get 0 out of 5 buttholes. I'm giving your husband 4 out of 5 buttholes and Carl 3 out of 5 buttholes. I'm sorry what happened to Carl and everything, but I can't believe that he would let his friend's wife sleep on the floor on their vacation just so he can get the bed. Am I the butthole for watching and not doing anything while my wife was being kicked out of my company? So I'm 33 and my wife is 26. We've been married for 2 years. I admit that she's a hothead and she can be a bit much, especially when she's mad at me. I take responsibility for any mistake I make, like not cleaning the bathroom after the shower or filling her car with gas after using it. I even stand there and let her unload her anger and frustration on me, but only at home, not in public. She tends to start arguing with me in public instead of waiting until we get home. Recently, she's been coming to my workplace to berate me over something I did the night before, like not getting the stuff I said I would get or doing the stuff I said I would do. It's embarrassing and humiliating. And it's been affecting my job to the point where I started getting multiple warnings from my superiors, who I believe have been very patient and understanding, especially when my wife makes a fuss at the office. Last week, I was in the middle of a 2-hour meeting, and next thing I know, I see my wife barging in while yelling at me, asking me why I was keeping my phone turned off. I was stunned because my boss, coworkers, and potential clients were all there. I didn't even move as my boss dealt with it by calling security to get her out. My wife started arguing with the security guy, telling him that she came here for me and started urging me to get up and tell them to back off. But I didn't. I just watched as security escorted her out. It was horrible because I was afraid that I had lost my job. She yelled at me repeatedly to get them to stop, but I didn't, and eventually they kicked her out. I was told that she is no longer allowed there, and this was going to be my final, last warning. I apologized, then went home. She was there waiting for me, yelling about me watching and doing nothing while she was getting mistreated and kicked out. I finally snapped and said that she was over the line, that she made a scene that risked my job over a few missed calls. She started crying, saying that I still should have defended her after getting humiliated in front of my coworkers. But I told her that she didn't have to worry about that because she's no longer allowed there. This made her furious, and she went to her mom's to stay there for the night. OP, you called your wife. What was the word you used? Was it hothead? Yeah, you said, I admit that she's a hothead, and she can be a bit much. But no, OP, your wife isn't a hothead, she's toxic. This behavior is not normal. Coming into your job and yelling at you in front of your coworkers? To be honest, I'm amazed your bosses didn't fire you right there, especially since clients were present. And I have to wonder, the fact that she has the free time to drive all the way to your office to yell at you on multiple occasions would lead me to believe that she's a stay-at-home housewife, which means that both of you rely on your income. Now granted, I'm just making a guess here, but she's jeopardizing the sole breadwinner just so she can, win a fight, I guess? Then what? You get fired and she yells at you while you're homeless on the street, saying it's all your fault for getting fired? OP, for real, you got to see the warning signs here. This is not normal. This is not healthy. This is really messed up. I would expect this behavior from a 16-year-old, not a 26-year-old. OP, you get 0 out of 5 buttholes. Your wife gets 4 out of 5 buttholes. If you ask me, what your wife is doing is a form of abuse.
This episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. Get better, faster hydration, and 10 refreshing fruity flavors with Liquid IV. Just rip the stick and pour the powder into 16 ounces of water. Liquid IV. Fuel your play. Grab your Liquid IV in bulk nationwide at Costco. Or you can get 15% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code PLAY15 at checkout. That's 15%.
That's all we do, and we upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday. So, if that's of interest to you, please log on to the 5-star review button's various streaming accounts and slightly fast forward. In the late 1800s, a very strange hotel was constructed in Chicago, Illinois. From the outside, it looked perfectly normal, but the inside of the hotel was anything but. Hallways were a maze of twists and turns, and there were trapdoors, sliding walls, and secret stairwells everywhere. But the shock factor of this hotel was part of its allure. Walking around and getting lost could actually be kind of thrilling. But what guests didn't know was that every time they got lost in that hotel, they might never find their way out again. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right podcast because that's all we do, and we upload twice a week, once on Monday and once on Thursday. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to house sit for the 5-star review button, and when you're there, cut all the drawstrings on their sweatpants. Also, please subscribe to the Mr. Ballin podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. It was the summer of 1888, and the residents of Englewood, Chicago had something new and exciting to talk about. the young, prosperous, and handsome owner of the neighborhood's local pharmacy, who had only arrived in Illinois 3 years earlier, had just bought the big empty lot on the corner of 63rd and Wallace Street. And since then, the owner, 28-year-old Dr. Henry Holmes, had let his many customers know that he was planning to build a grand hotel on that site, the likes of which this village on the south side of the largest Midwestern city in America had never seen before. But some Englewood residents had their doubts. On their way to or from work that July and August, groups of businessmen in black top hats and starched white collars paused at the huge vacant lot, tut-tutting over the cost of building on such marshy land, while sweat-stained day laborers shook their heads over the challenges of sinking a basement and foundation into that soft and shifting ground. But as Dr. Holmes himself looked at that ugly, barren property just across the street from his neat and profitable drugstore, all he felt was thrilled. It was the Gilded Age in America, when captains of industry in Chicago lived in mansions so enormous that they looked like castles, showy and glittering gems spread out along South Prairie Avenue and North Lakeshore Drive. And now, after 3 years of hard work and saving money, Dr. Holmes was sure that building and owning this hotel would be his first big step towards joining the exalted ranks of the city's self-made millionaires. The design for the building had come to Dr. Holmes months earlier, all at once, a complete picture right from the start of how the hotel would look both on the outside and on the inside. It would be 3 stories high, the first floor would house retail shops, he would sell his current drugstore and open a new one inside of his hotel on the first floor, along with a jewelry store, a restaurant, a barbershop, and a business that would sell the huge glass window panes that were in such high demand for the skyscrapers that were going up all over the heart of Chicago. The second and third floors of what Dr. Holmes thought of as his castle would each contain 35 rooms, with the third floor offering suites of rooms for long-term residents. His own office would be located on the second floor, in a corner overlooking the street. His quarters would also include rooms in the basement that he would use for his medical research. From the outside, the hotel would look impressive but ordinary. It was the interior of the hotel that Holmes intended to design in ways that he hoped would startle and delight the people who came to stay. It didn't take long for Dr. Holmes to commit this vision to paper, and by summer of the following year, 1889, he had the hotel blueprints and design finished, and enough money to start hiring construction workers. And just a few months later, on a hot day in July, Dr. Holmes watched with shining eyes from the doorway of his pharmacy as workers sank the first shovel into the wet earth across the street. His hotel project had officially begun. But despite his excitement, it would turn out that both the businessmen who had tut-tutted and shaken their heads over the cost of the project and the day laborers who had shaken their heads over the difficulty of building in marshy ground were right. The construction of Dr. Holmes's hotel would end up dragging for nearly 2 years until 1891, when they actually opened the hotel, but even then it wasn't done. They still had a year or 2 before it was actually finished. But as delayed as the project was, it actually would have taken even longer if Dr. Holmes had not been lucky enough to hire the man who would become not only his trusted construction foreman, but also his close personal friend. That man was Benjamin Pitezel. Benjamin Pitezel had arrived in Chicago from Indiana around the time Dr. Holmes's hotel was starting to be built. Benjamin was a tall, strong, 33-year-old carpenter who made up for his tendency to drink too much by his absolute devotion to his wife Carrie and their 5 children, who ranged in age from a few months old to 14 years old. Benjamin had come to Chicago determined to take any job he could that would provide for his growing family. And as he helped his wife and children off the train into Chicago's Grand Depot, he took special care